everyone. Simon Cousin here with Vipan Maney. We've got our second podcast with Vipan. How are you, mate?
All well, thank you very much, big man. How are you?
I'm very well. I'm very well. We're going to talk about one of my favorite subjects today, failure. Um, yeah, so of course,
Oh,
punch people in the chest with all
I,
oh,
I know that's quite negative already. People, if you say that word failure,
is
oh
it?
my God, it's a
I can't.
downer, Debbie
I can't.
Downer.
This is where we can have. This is why I'm looking forward to this chat, Vipan. I couldn't think of anything more positive than failure.
God, what a statement. Go on and explain.
Do you want me to go? Shall I just riff?
Yeah, just go for
Shall I
it.
just
Go
go?
for it.
I remember a coach of mine said, "You're a massive failure."
And I
He said,
bet you
"As in,
smile after that.
I just got into recovery. A teacher of mine, he said, "You're a massive failure." And I was like, "Oh," and he said, "And because you are, you're probably going to get this." He said, "You're probably going to go a really long way because you're a failure." I was like,
What did he mean by that then?
"Well, well, I know exactly what he meant because he told me it was that the only thing that determines how far someone goes is how much they fail." He said literally that your where you go in life is completely determined by your rate of failure, because your rate of failure determines your rate of learning. He said, and there is no learning without failure. He said people think they learn from books. He was massively against books. Like, you don't learn from reading a book because the book doesn't. You don't To really learn something, you need to have done it, practiced it, failed at it, reflected at it, maybe fail again. Um, I found it very reassuring in for a long time, I wore my failures on my sleeve, like the reason I would never amount to anything, failed cricket career. But I think when you start to see failure as something positive, then you can start to, like what you were saying last week in resilience, you start to be able to unpack it. Our aversion to failure stops us in inspecting it and stops us looking at it. I think where there's an emotional aversion to failure, and I think it comes from, we don't want to be a failure in other people's eyes, which comes from our parents, which comes from social circles. But actually,
Yeah.
if you sit, I know lots and lots of people who are avoiding failure and they aren't going anywhere. Really risk averse people, and they may well seem like they're something, but they don't know who they are. They don't have any wisdom. And then there's people who socially might not be seen as successes, but they failed a lot and they have a lot of wisdom. Like, a lot of so I come from real working class part of England. That's my heritage, and a lot of my family aren't financially successful. They're not socially what you would say is acceptable, acceptable,
I think
except
you mean materially successful. I think,
materially. But I mean,
yeah,
like within job descriptions and things that,
yeah.
like, you can play a pretty safe game, Vipan, and end up as the CEO. You can play a pretty safe game and end up as the CEO of a big corporate on 300, 400 grand a year. But I know people in my life who have failed a lot, and that means they've lost people as well. They've grieved and failed, and they might not have much, but they have a lot of wisdom,
Mm,
a lot of strength. The five
yeah.
people that I would go to if I had a massive problem wouldn't be the people who socially we think are successes. They would actually be the people who have failed a lot, because they know what it's like to fail. They know what it's like to be human. They know what it's like to take a risk. They know what it's like to lose something. They know what it's like to persist. They've got resilience. And so I almost don't trust anyone unless they've failed a lot, you know.
I think you're right. There's a lot of things that you've just said there are really interesting, especially where do we get this thing about failure from a very early age, don't we? That you mustn't. We're taught. I mean, I was, if you get a sum wrong, you're a failure, or you don't do well in a test, you're a failure. What a failure! No, I think it all stems from, and then you have this aversion and then what it means is that you don't want to do things in case you do fail. So you become, as you say, risk averse. But that all stems from what you've led to believe and how you're treated about failure. If you do fail, if you try something and you fail, it's didn't do very well, did you? And that gives a stigma. And then you take that with you, and it makes you that risk averse person especially, and if you keep getting those repeated messages, as so again, how you're brought up, and that can make a massive impact. But society also teaches us, Simon, that if you do something, well, I think there's a great way. I think there's a big difference in America and British culture, for example. I think, and in America, they don't see if you failed in business, it's just part and parcel. But they admire your gutsiness for trying, and then you try again. Here, if you fail in a business, it's sort of looked down upon and frowned upon, and that doesn't really encourage. Well, we could talk about if we, on a corporate level and about innovation, etc. But on a personal level, I think I think both of us have grown so much as a result of our respective failures. That's for sure. Um, but that's where the wisdom comes from. Is about learning from those failures. But you have to have a bit of guts to try something,
Oh,
knowing you might fail.
massively. And the more you fail, the harder it gets to keep going. Like you get sort of like the more you're rejected and the more you fail, it's like it does take its toll, I think, in life. Like that's been my experience anyway. It takes like they're saying fall down seven, stand up eight. Like the
Yeah,
second time you stand up is a lot easier than the eighth time you stand up. Like I've gone through addiction and cricket career, and you have to be really honest about why you failed and bring it back to yourself. But there's also things you can't control. You have to let go of, and I think that's wisdom. Wisdom is learning the difference between what you can and can't control. There's lots of things wisdom is, but
yeah.
I think when you get to your like, well, you've had 3 heart attacks, right? When you get to the third one, you go, oh, bloody hell, like it's like, oh, I've got to go through this again, or it's I like being in recovery because there's no real illusion in recovery that life will suddenly start being. I mean, recovery is amazing because you don't have hangovers. You've got more money in the bank because you're not spending it on, whatever you are. And there's a real where like recovery. I remember going into Vipan. I remember going into a meeting really early on, and I was like, I don't know, 2 weeks sober, and I was like, go into this room. I'm 2 weeks sober. I'm like 31. I don't know anything. I just feel good, right? And I'm like, I'm definitely gonna get this. Oh my god, this is gonna be amazing. Oh, I love being sober. It's so fantastic. And there was a guy in the corner of the room who was this 60-year-old American, and he had this tash and it's like this dour. He was just like looking through me the whole time. And because of that, I was, like, Daddy, like, I went over to him afterwards and I said, his name was Hank. And I said to him, Hank, will you be my sponsor? Because I thought this guy, 30 years sober, will you be my
Yeah.
sponsor? And he just goes, no. And I went, why not? And he went, you'll never stay sober. And I
Ooh.
went, so he went, you'll never stay sober. Because I was too idealistic, too full of my own stuff. He'd just seen me come and go,
Mm.
and he was like, no, you'll never stay sober. And then I remember in not I thought about taking my own life when I'd been in addiction, right? Like the ultimate failure, right? When you feel like such a failure that you have to leave the planet, right? Go into the ultimate unknown and just leave, right? People, and this, like, we are failing as a society at the moment because the leading cause of death is suicide in people under the age of 35. When I was in addiction, I thought a lot about suicide and tried it and failed, thankfully. That's a good kind of failure when you don't.
That is a good.
That one.
Thank God
Great
for
failure,
that.
that one. I remember being in recovery too, and I freaked out because in recovery, as a sober man, I started to feel a bit suicidal. And I remember I shared that in a meeting, and Hank came up to me and he went, I'm beginning to trust you. And this guy knew what life was about. He'd failed, he'd lived, he'd probably, people live on, you lose businesses, you get divorced, you win some, you lose some, and you grow from it. And that's more like what life is. You speak a lot about optimism as not a sort of a rose tinted view of life, but optimism is more like whatever happens, I'll get through it. Right.
Yeah, it's acceptance. It's acceptance, and it's not. we have bad feelings, and going through failure, it's not easy. Christ, we're not saying, oh God, please go and fail. It's a great way of
I
to
am.
learn. It's painful.
No,
Let's
but
be honest.
no. This is where I want to go because we haven't got we. This is I think we should encourage people to fail. Do you know Carl Jung? People used to go to Carl Jung and they'd say, "I've had a really, really bad day," and he'd go, "Fantastic." And then they go, "I've had a really great day." He'd go, "I'm so sorry." Like Brendan McCullum's just taken over the UK the British test English test
Yeah,
team,
yeah, yeah.
and he said we're going to run at failure.
Mm.
We're going to run at failure. You and
But
I are
that's
quite different. Like you've spent your whole life at looking at risk properly, and
yeah.
I've gone into failure left, right, and centre. What's your view on that?
Okay, so my quickly for for everyone not wants to know a bit more. I spent many years looking at risk management as a management consultant, so advising businesses on how to take risk in a managed way. So you look at there's obviously opportunities when you take risks. Okay, however, that's the upside. The downside is that if it doesn't work out and you fail, there's going to be a cost. And then the issue is that you what is that cost going to be? And have you thought about it? And how can you manage that? And you put in try and try and put a safety net in or uh, whatever to try and think about what if the worst scenario comes, what can you do about it to to stop it getting really bad, basically, in very simple terms. But then what it is that people should be encouraged to take risks, though. But that's the upside. But at the time, though, still going back to your point, you say people should be encouraged to fail. Only if they failure, there's nothing wrong in trying things. I definitely think that. And but then what is it that you learn from it? I mean, you can keep failing and failing and doing the same thing without learning anything. So failure for failure's sake is pretty useless. But failure, and then you reflect. So we both. I failed in a business. I set up a furniture business with the Chinese, which is pretty scary when I knew nothing about furniture. Um, and all I'd spent is my entire life working in the city, decided I had a midlife crisis and had this big thing about myself, thinking I could be set up a very successful furniture business. I don't know where I got that idea from, and then I decided to join up with Chinese manufacturer and set up a franchise in England. But it wasn't financially successful. So in that way, you could look at it as a failure. But and reflecting on it, but it taught me a lot about myself. I think this is where, at the time it was really painful, Simon, and I had, sleepless nights, stresses dealing with the Chinese for various reasons, and it caused me a lot of stress. But do you realize? And it wasn't pleasant. However, going through it and looking back on it, I think it was probably one of the best things I've done because it opened opportunities in other areas of my life because people were really interested to know how was it working with the Chinese, for example, and what can you learn about that. But so you may, in a way, become more marketable from your failure,
Yeah,
which is. But I'm not saying we should all be Eddie the Eagle,
yeah,
serenade that type of failure, but you need courage to try things. I think we should all be encouraged to try different avenues in life because life is a much more richer, isn't it? And let's face it, as you said earlier, if you play safe and not take any risks, you can have a very uneventful, safe life, as it were.
yeah.
But it's a very boring life as well.
Some people are suited to it. I think also understanding what your I like Jordan Peterson talks about anthropologically I think of the right word.
Mm,
Walking, we are falling forwards. Do you know that? So
mm.
when we walk, you're
Yeah,
literally about to fall on your face and you put another foot in front of yourself. So walking has evolved that we are failing forwards.
yeah,
There's that one. And he also says stumble towards the light. Um,
yeah.
if this, sorry, Vipan, if this runs out,
Mm.
I'll cut this up in the middle, but if this runs out, I'll just send you another link. And
Okay, got
just
it.
we'll go for about another 5 minutes. I'll cut this bit out in the middle. Yeah, you
Right.
stumble towards a life. So I think there's something I fundamentally believe. You can fail as an aimless person, right? But if you fail in the right direction, I think there's something about that. It's like well, if you think about a plane that goes to its destination, it's not always headed directly at the destination, right? So if you
Yeah,
look
yeah.
at it like in a micro way, the plane is actually heading away from New York at some point. But if it's heading, it has to course correct all the time. And I think that the big part of failing is failing in the right direction. So failing with the right intention, failing in the right direction, and not failing recklessly or as a result of giving up. Or I think you can fail poorly and you can fail well. But I do think people who avoid failure, or I think something like the only true failure is giving up. If the only real failure is to give up.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
think
for
something
sure.
like that. Like if you give up, you failed. And actually, that's only the real failure is to give up. If you're trying, you can never fail. You can just learn.
But failure, people associate, I think there's a fear. This is, and you can see it, I've got three kids, and there is definitely an aspect of children for some reason that they don't want to try something or do something because they think they won't succeed. So that for them, that's a failure. So they won't bother try. If they can't be successful, they won't try it in the first place. And I think that's really sad. Um, uh, because then they lose out on the experience. But then, many times I think then they'll go for it and then they really enjoy it. And then they think, oh my God, why didn't I do this earlier?
Yeah.
Well, you
I heard a
just
great
never know
story.
unless you try.
I heard a great story about Kobe Bryant. Kobe Bryant was 13, I think, and played a whole season and in his team when he was 13 and didn't score one basket. And I think he was dropped from the team. And his dad said to him, "You know what? I love you if you score no baskets, and I'm always going to love you,
Mm,
whether you score a basket or you don't." And Kobe Bryant said that gave him the permission that he needed to go out and fail. Yeah,
yes.
because he knew the whole way through his life. It's really inspiring. Quite
Mm,
most, quite, when you've got children, you think, "Whoa, proper parenting that."
yeah,
No, like he
definitely.
said to him, "Whatever you do, I will love you." And so
Yeah.
Kobe said it gave him the permission to go out and just try. And he said he started working harder and he became less afraid of missing because he knew. And he said his dad never treated him any differently. The fact that he was Kobe Bryant and he scored, this many points and things like that, he said his dad just never
Mm,
treated him any differently.
I
And
love
I
that
think it's
story.
big
That's a
role,
great.
massive role
Mm,
for parents and teachers and coaches, is not to, because I think one of the reasons young people put themselves under pressure is because literally love stops if they fail. I see it a lot in children. I relate to it a lot from, like a lot of people don't realize how conditional
yeah.
they are. And schools are conditional because it's like if you get a good mark, then you've succeeded, which means you're better than those people over there who have got a bad mark. Jess and I, the we're discussing, we won't be like that as parents. We're like, we accept that schools will be like that, but to go, you are an acceptable person if you get seven, if you're a success.
Yeah.
We wonder why people are killing themselves with mental health issues. Go and look at that because that's
It,
incredibly destructive.
it is. It is. It is. And in the past I've been guilty of putting pressure. And you're right, it is conditioning. I was put under a lot of pressure to succeed academically by my parents. Um, but then, when you have children, you want them to be, you think you equate success with happiness. And so you think academically that is going to come as well. But it just puts a lot of pressure on your children, actually. And they need to learn that it's okay that if they do. as long as they try. I think this is
Yeah.
what it is. It's if they try their hardest and they don't succeed, I think that is amazing. The fact is that they're giving their best shot. I think that's what we should encourage much more. And I think the ethos of schools needs to change as well. And reward what is rewarding. You don't reward failure, but you reward effort, focused effort.
Yeah.
I think is much better than failure without effort, but also success without effort as well.
Well, I think Malcolm Gladwell, I don't know if you read, have you read Outliers?
I've the book no, but I've
Outliers
certainly
it took a
heard.
look at the took a look at the most successful people who have produced the most, innovated the most.
Hmm,
I think there's a part in that book that said that basically the people who weren't successful in it's basically the more successful you are in high school, the less successful you'll actually be if you measure it by impact, not salary. So, you know, the people you think of like Richard Branson left school when he was 15, like people like they weren't successful at school. Or for me, you think about the runt at school, like I look at like there's a couple of people now, I see them on LinkedIn and I think, oh my God, that's amazing. Because when you were 14, you can't help when and then I spent my whole time in school trying to be the best cricketer, the best this,
hmm.
and it was just a mask for what was going on underneath. But actually, it's the quiet achievers who aren't, um, who maybe are more of a failure early on. Maybe they get a more of a rate of learning.
So I wanted to ask you then, Simon. Tell me what was what has been your biggest learnings from your failures?
I think the biggest learnings I have, it's quite funny really, because the more I go along in life and reflect on where I've failed, the more I come back to like really simple morality and almost like 10 commandments, like I think that I have failed in my life because I've not been honest with myself. Um, I have failed because I've not been honest with others. Certainly in addiction, that's all addiction is. Um, I think the biggest learnings would be about honesty, and that's still something that I'm learning about now, even because I think being honest is requires like wisdom to be honest about who you are and not to allow yourself to be swayed also by the external. Like the world wants to tell you who you are all the time, and it wants to mold you into something that to really stand out and be who you truly are. I think is a takes a lot of courage and to be very honest in that. This is what I think. This is how I feel. Um, I think the other thing I've learned from my failures is I've definitely quit things too early. I've definitely a persistence thing. I think it's definitely it's something I really put into practice now. Especially I sort of realized about 3 years ago, just as I'd met my wife, actually, that I wanted to be. When you meet someone who you want to spend the rest of your life with, it really wakes you up into like I want to give my whole life to something. I think a lot of my failures were because I wasn't completely in, and I think that so to be all in. Um, Jordan Peterson says some games you only get to play when you're all in.
Yeah.
I don't think I was all in with cricket. I think I was
You mean committed? What do you mean by all in?
all
Tell
in
me.
means all in, like all of you,
Yeah,
everything
yeah.
you've got, like until
Mm,
almost like Jess and I will say marry it.
mm,
So it's like okay, right, Vipan, you're at the beginning of you're at the beginning of a journey, trying to not trying but getting your message out there. You've got to marry that mission.
yeah.
It means till death. We say marry it. So you make a decision and you marry the decision. So it's marriage becomes this like till death does me part, right? And I think that a lot of my failure has been a reflection of my I don't think I ever really wanted to be a cricketer. So I think a lot of it was actually doing the things that I really wanted to do. I did a lot of things to make my dad happy, or when I was at school, I didn't really care. I found myself doing lots of things that were for other people. So I think doing something for myself that I really care about, that comes from within, committing to it for lifelong. Like this, what we're doing right now, this is a very, very small part of a lifelong mission for me, because
Yeah.
I've married service. I've married my wife. I've married my children. I've married my spiritual commitments. And for me, it's a lifelong commitment. And I think one of the biggest things anybody can do, because I think that almost guarantees success, because you go, I'm definitely going to fail. My wife and I are definitely going to argue. I'm definitely not going to get the views I want on YouTube videos. I'm definitely going to fail and fail and fail. But the only thing that is a true failure is if I quit. So I
Yeah.
think it's like taking quitting out. I think that's probably the biggest thing I've learned. So I just will never quit. And there's a relentlessness that comes with being an addict anyway. It took a long time for me to quit booze. And so I think being all in for within me, it's like infinity.
Yeah.
Like I'm in for an infinite amount of time. There's no time
Yeah.
limit on this. It's just I'm in.
Well, now you've over time, I think age gives you a bit more self-belief, wisdom, and with that wisdom, you get more self-belief, and you're less interested in your ego and pleasing others. And all
Yeah,
that, it's like a recipe. That mixture is quite heady, because now you're just all in because you can see the bigger picture, as it were.
yeah,
Whereas before you were too eager, like, I'm not saying you as in you, Simon, but I'm talking about generally people, and definitely me. I was much too concerned, for example, as you have been, in pleasing others,
definitely.
and thinking of what others were thinking about me before I did something, and
Yeah,
how would that be perceived. Oh, I can't speak. I used to have this fear of speaking out in class, because what if I say something
yeah,
stupid? Imagine what everyone's going to think of me. I'm going to be so, I mean, the typical word is that I'm going to be so embarrassed. What does that mean? I mean, my children still say, Dad, you're so embarrassing. Do I care? No.
as you get older, no.
I mean, as you go older, I feel that self-consciousness is subsumed within if we're talking spirituality and a bigger consciousness. So that takes a bit of wisdom, but you have to start reflecting. And for me, that comes with failures, actually, because then you've
Yeah,
learned from that, and you've actually done some um self-growth. You've grown, but you've actually understood a bit better. Self-reflection is what I'm trying to say.
yeah,
That self-reflection gives you perspective, and that perspective sets you in a direction, Simon.
yeah,
And you're less bothered whether you fail. It's more about trying and giving it your best effort, because you believe in it more. Yeah. So
definitely.
for me, I think that's what happens, and I can see that's from listening to you is what I think has happened, and I can relate to that, because
Yeah,
that's what's happened to me as well.
yeah, and I think that as you fail more, there's actually nothing like, I learned so much about myself by going to rehab, which, to really hit rock bottom, right? It's like failure, you know. I remember sitting in rehab thinking, God, I used to be a professional cricket player. Now I'm in rehab and I had nothing, I really nothing. I just had rehab. And I was so grateful to be there. But I was like, I felt, I had to really face a lot of feelings of being a failure. But I'll tell you one thing you learn when you're at the bottom, you learn who the real people are, right?
Yeah.
And you learn who you truly are when you're at the bottom, because there's parts of you that fall away when you failed, like at that level, because things that you believe that don't serve you fall away, and you sit there at the bottom, and what's important is left. Do you know what I mean? Like I really like some of the allegories in nature, like gold, like gold is made by, or, you burn off the impurities, like it's made under fire, right?
Yeah.
And nature above Jesus Christ, there's this word because INRI, INRI, above the crucifix. People don't really understand what the crucifixion means because we're so wrapped up on it being a real man who died on a cross, and but the symbolism behind the cross is unbelievably deep. And it says INRI, and INRI, I believe it's Latin, and it literally means the fire that renews all. Right. And the idea of a man being on a cross, right, is the ultimate failure. I mean, to be crucified in front of your family for something you haven't done, like this is just a story. But the ascension afterwards is what matters in that story, because it's the renewal of the spirit. It's the renewal through death, like, and the thing that I think about failure is we run away from failure, but actually ascension or renewal or rejuvenation, or even, I work with people now and they need a new identity, right? And actually what they don't realize, another great saying, everybody wants to be reborn, but no one wants to die. Right? Like people don't realize what's required for, like you have had to, you probably are I didn't know you before, but it seems to me that you're a completely different person in so many ways. And obviously so much of you is the same. But you had to be crucified, and you had to lay on a floor for 40 minutes knowing that you're going to die. And you had to face the consequences of your own anger and your own misaligned values and the decisions that you'd made to put yourself in a situation that led you to, and then you had to face probably, your conditioning. And you don't get renewal without death and without fire and without pain. And nature teaches us that. And I think that failure is a doorway to success. And I don't think you get to success without going through that doorway. And I would even go as far to say that you don't get to new life without going through death. We're not talking about failure. We're talking about death of the old. There is no new without the death of the old. I found this, so much of me still needs to die. Like I still am hanging on to old bits of myself that don't serve me. There's still parts of my character, and I still sit here holding on to them because I'm so afraid. The ego never wants to let go of itself. It never wants to let go, but I need to sit there. I need to be humble. I need to fail. I need to, there is a lot required. It's really easy if you want to build a bicep, right? Because you just go in and you lift a weight and it's heavy enough. But what people don't realize is the old bicep is dying and the new bicep is being reborn through ripping it to freaking shreds. And then because it's been like, if you take one fiber in your bicep muscle, if you lift a heavy enough weight, it's being obliterated to smithereens. And then the immune system is sending a response to go and rebuild it. The immune system sends amino acids and proteins, and it's like a response from God, according to the thing, where it gets rebuilt. Like every time you lift every time you do a bicep curl, your bicep is being crucified and being reborn as a bigger bicep. That's failure.
Jesus, God.
Yeah, Jesus, right? Like that's.
Oh, sorry, I don't know if that's appropriate.
Jesus, that's what we're talking about.
Don't even get me appropriate.
Don't even get me started about Jesus, mate. Because don't even get me started because I spend so much time finding meaning in the cross. This is my big passion. Is
I can see that.
It's not. It's what that means. It's what death means and rebirth, and it's. I think people don't realize what it like. Just to avoid failure is to avoid new life,
and also growth. I don't think you can grow as a person, Simon. I think that's the bottom line. You want to grow, and we all talk about life is about living, but about growing as a person. And I think to be resilient, you need to grow, and to grow, you need to learn, and to learn, you need to fail. So it's that virtuous circle of life.
Definitely. So this is why fear is the great.
That's the enemy.
The fear is the great enemy, because the fear is what stops us moving into the unknown. And fear is, in all of the spiritual and religious texts, fear is seen, and the mind, that voice that says, don't do this, you'll fail if you do this, you'll fail if you do this. The mind is always seen as a devil or a demon or whatever it might be in all texts that's been around longer than we have. Right. And that's because it stops us moving forwards. Now in an ideal world, what I like about you, Vipan, and what you've done is teacher I like says we have the amygdala or the reptilian brain. It's the oldest part of our brain. It's what's enabled us to evolve, right? Because we survived. The only reason we're still here is because we survived.
Yeah.
And the evolution is so strong. It's a lot of years of us evolving through survival. There's the amygdala, and there's the center of the brain. Then you've got the frontal cortex. And the frontal cortex wants to thrive and grow and learn and expand. And the amygdala wants to do the opposite. And you've got, this is why we feel split in our minds between fear and the love. There's one part of us which is like the spirit. The spirit wants to thrive and grow and serve, and the amygdala wants to stay where it is, because if you do what you did yesterday, you'll still be here today, because according to the amygdala, yesterday was a success. Right?
Yeah.
Yesterday was a success because you didn't die.
Yeah.
Now, people who live from that place, they end up living in that part of their mind, which stops them feeling that expansive sense of growth and service and transcendence and transformation. And the biggest gift that we've had in recovery, certainly Jess and I, is you hit a place where you've got no choice. You have to, you hit rock bottom. I wish rock bottom on everybody. You've hit yours, I've hit mine. That's why we're here. I wish rock bottom on everybody. That's why our society's sick, because people think they're successful because they're climbing a corporate ladder and they've got a nice coffee machine, and I'll get really fired up about this. The big addiction of our time is comfort.
Yeah.
We're addicted to comfort, and it's
that comfort zone. Yeah, you've got to step out of it now and again to actually experience growth, and even if it's difficult and sometimes it's really painful.
And I like these chats too, because what I like about this chat is now, after this podcast, everywhere I'm full of shit will now be reflected back to me. I like these. So it's a risk to come out and start talking about what you think because afterwards you go, oh my God, 20% of that I'm really not living by. I'm already. I think if you're married to a good person, then you will be challenged enough to really have to be the best person you can be. If you're in a good job with a good leader, they will require you to step up. If you have a good teacher or a good role model or a good father, part of being a good father, I would imagine, is to, is to find that balance between, like what Kobe's dad did, is he inspired him into the unknown. I mean, that's just like fantastic, to inspire someone into the unknown. No matter what you do, I love you.
I think it's Kobe's father did the ultimate of providing that safety net, so the guy could actually throw himself, as it were, and knowing that his dad will catch him, even if, no matter what.
And that's what Jesus, and by the way, that's what Christ had on that archetypally is told in the crucifixion, because the reason Jesus can be killed on the cross is he knows the Father will catch him. And that's why Kobe ascended to the heights he did, because he's mirroring the archetypal journey. It's not about being religious or spiritual. Like, he's mirroring a journey that we've been taught, which is to feel so safe in, if it's your father's love or even God's love, the love of something bigger than yourself, And for Kobe, that was his dad. But his dad in that moment is God. He says, whatever you do, I'll catch you.
Yeah.
Whatever you do, I'll catch you. I mean, how inspiring is that? Like, I've got a day with the boys today, and I'm like, whatever you do, I will catch you. If you're a teacher or a parent or whatever you do, I will be there.
They should start the day at school saying that, and instill in children that's what's going to happen to you today. So just try. It doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter if you fail.
Just try. I think, what if they change the whole way of thinking like that at schools? I think you'd have a totally different result in people's education levels and attitude to learning, even.
Exactly, because you've got freedom. There's freedom to, oh my God, we all want that, don't we? That's what makes us happy, is to be free to try things. You watch a child who hasn't had that put on them and they go and play, they'll take risks. You watch a boy who doesn't know, they'll go climb trees, they'll jump off things. They're learning about their own boundaries. But I think, I've got a lot from this. So it's a lot longer than it would be, but I've got a lot from this. I need to go and almost like meditate for an hour.
All right, mate. That was just free. That did really flow well, and I
Yeah.
could see your passion coming out of that. And so that's really good. Thank you, mate.
What's
I
next? What subject? We're still recording, so
well,
flow on service.
yeah, I like that. Let's do service.
So
Word
next
service.
episode, service. All right, we'll say
All
goodbye,
right.
and you and I will keep talking.
Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.